Oh, welcome to the Sharpe Show. So happy to have you with me this evening, a little bit past 7 p.m. on the East Coast. I know I'm a couple minutes late. Don't be mad at me. I'm still human. Anyway, I'm doing my job. I'm trying to get some cool people here to talk about cool stuff here. And I'm focusing today on New York State / New York City, both of those two, which I don't always focus on. That's not true. I focus all the time on New York. Doesn't matter. You guys should pretend like I don't. Today I'm doing even more. And I want to talk with someone who, for most of you, you would think that we would disagree on a lot. And that may be true. But I think there's something that him and I completely agree upon. We love this city. We love this state. And we really want to try to fix it. We're sitting here punishing ourselves, trying to fix this state as people fight against us constantly. The establishment and everything else push against us. So I hope we'll have a great conversation. I want to bring in, if I could, the Assemblyman here in my area, here in Astoria, Zohran Mamdani. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, sir. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And for those of you who want to see what he's doing, please feel free to follow him on Twitter. It is Zohran K. Mamdani. That is, if you're listening to this in podcast, it is ZOHRANKMAMDANI. So the thing I think that drew me to even want to talk to you off the bat, that really pulled me into you, was this idea of what people are calling sewer socialism. This is something that's much more localized. And I think localization is something that very few people talk about. They're always talking about, oh, we got to worry about who the president is. Or we got to worry about who's running for the Senate of the U.S. We always got to worry about the big top line, and we don't worry about kind of what's in our backyard sometimes. Tell me about that.
You know, sewer socialism is a term that was coined in Milwaukee in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And, you know, the reason for its coinage being in Milwaukee is that is where there were a number of local socialist electeds. And I think that we are now in a comparable time in Astoria, in that for the first time in around 100 years or so, we have socialist elected officials at every single level of government in one neighborhood. So myself in the Assembly, Kristen Gonzalez in the state Senate, Tiffany Caban in the council, and then AOC in the federal level of Congress. And the idea of sewer socialism, it stems from a belief that the way in which you practice your politics has to be understood and evidenced in what you're doing in your neighborhood.
Okay.
And what's so compelling about that for me is a lot of people do not have a lot of faith or trust in the government. And I understand why they feel that way, because regularly they interface with government institutions that are not effective, that are not efficient, and to put it bluntly, they are not excellent. They are far from it.
Yep.
So that each time you have an interaction like that, it chips away at your faith that the state should be the entity that provides anything of necessity in your life.
Absolutely.
Each time you have that interaction, you start to believe, maybe I should rely on the market. Maybe it is the market.
Let me go even further with this. I think this is institutions in general, right? I think this even winds up pushing us toward not trusting our universities, right? Not trusting anything that is seen as big, right? In general, I think we stop being afraid of everything. Because I think a lot of people, and I'm sure you see this, they just check out. They go, why bother, right? Why bother voting? Why bother showing up? Why bother protesting the police, right? Why bother doing these things? Because I've lost faith. I think it goes to many things, not just government.
Yeah, it is. There's a crisis of trust in our society. And I think, oftentimes when you're a politician or you hear a politician speaking about this, there's kind of a browbeating that people just need to get back in line and people just need to participate. But the truth of it is that people are making rational decisions. a lot of the time. And I think that in that diminishing of trust, it's because of these experiences that people are having again and again and again. And so one of the most compelling ideas of a sewer socialism is that you rebuild that faith from the ground floor. You rebuild the faith in a larger society through how effective sanitation is, how on time your train is, how excellent your public school is. These things that are happening in your neighborhood.
I remember a story. This is a fun story that there was actually a TV show, a crime show in Japan, right? And this is from like 20 years ago, where the trains were so on time that the cops and detectives literally said, well, no, he couldn't have killed the guy because he was on the 937. And clearly the 937 is never late. So obviously he couldn't have killed the guy. Could you imagine that happening in New York City?
I know. I mean, I remember reading a tweet from a man in Ukraine who was writing that because of the war, the trains were only coming every 6 minutes. Because of the war.
So basically what you're saying is that we need a war in New York. Is that what you're saying, right? We got to go to war. Okay. That's it.
I think, and that's partially that's the importance of knowing of a world beyond the city and in the country that you live in,
right?
Because you can see that it does not have to be this way. It does not. In fact,
you speak about the idea of trying to repair the MTA, right? That's one of your big things. You've got several things you're concerned about. One of them is the MTA, which is literally, like you said, it's a local issue here, across New York City, particularly in Queens, of course. But you want to do several things, and please correct me if I'm wrong. But it's basically three pieces. You want to freeze the fare at $2.75, right? You want more services, right? And you want a series, and this part I don't understand, a series of free buses. Can you go through those three?
Absolutely. So you're very correct in that the major three planks of the campaign were those three things. The first thing is the idea of freezing the fare. So the MTA, the economic model that the MTA is built on and has been operating on the basis of for decades is the idea of a regular fare increase. That every few years we increase the fare 4%, let's say. And it's important because it's a regular stream of revenue to fund MTA operations. I believe that a public good, which is what the MTA is, that a public good should not be funded on the backs of the working class people who need that good the most.
Okay.
That what the public good, such as the MTA, should be funded as is the way that other public goods like sanitation or libraries or the fire department are used. Imagine if you charged people a specific amount of money every time they took a book out of the library, or if you charged people a specific amount of money every time they put the trash out. You are putting a cost on a service that is just as critical as these other ones. And
my worry with this, though, right? My concern is, okay, we cap it. Because to be forward, I'm old enough to remember 50 cents.
Yeah.
Like, I can remember that. I lived in the Bronx in the 70s. So I remember, right? So I can remember that. But now we cap it. Okay, great. I love the concept because I agree with you. I don't think the working poor and middle class who use the subway more than anybody else, I mean, bar none, those are two groups of people who use it, is, of course you shouldn't pay for it. Of course it shouldn't be that high. I agree. But then how do you get it out of deficit? How do you get the MTA out of deficit by making them, in theory, I guess, work harder if you're going to have them have more trains or faster trains, either one, and then capping it? It seems like it's not going to work. Help me with that one.
Yeah, no, I think that it's a very good point, and the only way that we can really make this work of freezing the fare is by changing the economic model, right? If you have an economic model that the fare increases, it cannot work. But if we shift that model and fund this public good that is the MTA through taxation of a different means, taxation that is progressive as opposed to regressive, then you can eliminate the necessity of raising that fare. So there are two things here. One is, with regards to running more trains, definitely will cost money. Running more buses definitely will cost money. Freezing the fare, that costs money, right? Because you're paying for what you would otherwise get from a raised fare. But benefits of having a public transit system that is efficient and safe and universally accessible, they are beyond what the MTA's bottom line is. They are.
I agree with that. Let me give you an idea if I could.
Please.
When I ran in 2018, I had an idea, and I brought it again in 2022. My idea to repair the MTA was to, instead of using taxpayer dollars, which I was worried that if we keep taxing people, they'll keep leaving. That's my concern, right? So I said, how about we do this instead? Two different ideas that overlap. One of them is, what if we were to say at night, when about half the trains run, give or take, we take about every other train and we allow freight to come into New York City via the train system. So we allow Amazon to bring their freight trains in. We allow FedEx to bring their freight trains in, UPS to bring their freight trains in. So every other train, so it's still the same amount of trains coming at night, which you know is a whole lot less. Every other train, freight train. Now, as freight comes in, without question, freight trains can't be in the same lines as these lines are, right? However, that means they'll have to rebuild all the lines. They can afford it. Just Amazon, their marketing budget's $40 billion a year. Just Amazon. I didn't count every other delivery company, every other major store, Google, whoever wants a piece of this. So now they're going to throw billions into this system happily, eagerly. So now they can bring their stuff directly in. We can name the hubs after them, lease out naming rights, right? Oh, here's the hub. It's lease naming rights. But not just that, they'll also run security. While Amazon doesn't care about your life or mine, they do care about their products a lot. So they will make sure their products are safe. So they'll run private security if need be, if the cops need help, whatever. So that also can ensure with other security if need be. We do that, and all of a sudden now some money starts coming in. We get a rebuilt system. Money comes in. They're paying for it on their own. We don't have to worry about New York City people even doing it. They can hire their own people if they want to. I don't care. They lease out the naming rights so that the city still owns it. It's still owned by, well, actually, owned by the state. Owned by the state, owned by the city still. But now money comes in. Second, now that money coming in means now we can keep the fare down. They're helping to pay for new trains because they want freight trains. They're paying for new engines, new locomotives. They're paying for all this stuff. Happily, eagerly. So I've got the wealthiest companies eagerly paying for the working poor and the middle class. I feel like this style could work. Am I off? I'm happy to give me as much pushback as you have.
I don't think that is a vision that I would support. And I think part of the reason is that once you introduce the possibility of corporate involvement in the use of the system, then you're opening the door. And let's say if we go down this road that Amazon and UPS and companies, and I have a number of disagreements, but let's go through it and say that they start to run freight every other train in the nighttime. They might then, it might be so successful for their transportation that they want to start to increase the number of trains that they're running.
Lovely idea.
Then the state will have to make a decision, because you're already deciding to take away half the amount of service that people would use to give it to these companies to fund the other half.
No, that's not true. Let me correct a little bit. It's only at night, and it's every other train. So already it's not being run.
But every other.
Well, what would be normally, right? Usually they're saying,
adding an additional service that does. Okay.
So we're not losing that at least. I agree that, look, if I'm a company and this is making money, you're right. I'm going to want more. 100%. That's true. But I'm just saying initially there is nothing. But there's a second benefit to this. If there's more freight coming in at night, then there's less trucks on the road in the city during the day and at night. So it does take truck traffic off of the city of New York City on top of it. Extra bonus.
And I think that's where you and I agree is the necessity of reducing congestion and the necessity of having these large trucks use city roads. And I say city roads not in the sense of who owns them, but city roads in the sense of they are going sometimes on side streets, right? Like I had a constituent of mine was killed by a cement truck that was turning not on a highway, not on a thoroughfare, but on a side street. So I think to boil down what
I'm sorry, I cut you off. I apologize. You were talking about the companies wanting to get more.
Yeah. So I guess the larger piece of opposition is when you start to contract things out to private companies by the state, you start to diminish the capacity of the state and increase the reliance on these external companies. And you might even get to a point, let's say, where the state starts to say, well, Amazon is running these trains great. Why don't we just start to turn over other services of the train system to Amazon?
Speaking my language.
But now that's your language. For me, that's my fear. And the reason that's a fear is if you look at these companies right now and how they engage with their workers, Amazon has the kind of work requirements that forces its employees to piss into water bottles so they don't take time away to build out their boxes. UPS has drivers up until just now who are driving in 110-degree heat with no air in the car.
Yep. Agreed.
So these are the companies where I'm like, I don't want them anywhere near running a critical system. But I think the point where we agree, in addition to what I've said about the congestion, is that there is a role for companies to play in resolving this crisis. The role that I see is making New York, and I never thought I would say this, but making New York a little bit more like New Jersey. And what I mean by that is
now you're insulting us all.
I know. but here's the truth, is that New York has a corporate tax rate of 7.5%, around 7.25, I think. New Jersey's is north of 11%. And the interesting thing about corporate taxes in New York State is that they are taxes on a corporation's activities in the state, not taxes on corporations headquartered in the state. So the importance of that difference is that if you leave the state, but you continue to do business in the state, you will still be taxed for that business. And so often when you talk about taxes, there's the concern about flight. This is one that does not apply with regards to the corporate tax. And that's, you were talking about Amazon's marketing budget alone is $40 billion, right?
That's worldwide, though, just to be fair. That is worldwide.
But, we're also talking about the MTA, which nationwide responsible for 40% of all public transit trips in the country. And, these companies and the individuals who run them have made so much money that these people don't even know what to do with it.
No, I'm not saying you're wrong. I agree.
And so that's where I'm like, Jeff Bezos, he's trying to figure out a way to get to space. I think because we've left him a little bit too much money. And
my worry, as always, is just how are we able to make it happen without ballooning our budget, right? I always worry about our budget. Data you probably know already. New York State per capita, largest budget in the entire country, right? Per capita, largest per in the entire country by far, worse than California, largest by far, and most people would say is government bureaucratic bloat, right? We're the most unionized. Most of those are public sector unions. Most of them are not private sector unions, which with my push with this to bring up what you were talking about is if we contract it out, we can contract it with some stipulations. We can say 50% of your workforce must be unionized or something, right? I made that number up, obviously. But we could do something to where we could actually encourage private sector unions by saying, if you want the contract to do the thing in the MTA, you got to have X% union jobs. You could do something like that to actually encourage the growth of public sector unions. I think it's possible. Private sector versus public sector unions, which I think, generally speaking, we don't have that much of a problem with public sector union growth. We have a problem with private sector union growth. That's our biggest issue, right? Most socialists want some form of workers owning the means of production in some way, shape, or form. Unionization is one way, co-ops are another, right? There are other ways of doing it. And I feel like we don't do a good job of either of those. We kind of just push public sector unions, which I think can be a massive problem. They are one of the reasons, there are many, for bloat versus having more private sector unions, which is more of a real back and forth. So I think that could do something. Am I off on this?
I really think that there's two things. One thing is I think that when you increase union density in this country, you reduce income inequality. There's a direct relationship between the two of them. And we've seen as union density decreases, the inequality has skyrocketed. Yep. So I know oftentimes when speaking about the MTA, there is a tendency to go towards this question of the real problem here is unions. And that's not something I subscribe to. I think for me, when I think of TWU, which is the union that really, it's TWU, ATU, but by and large, TWU, for example, with regards to the MTA's operations here in New York City, these are the people who kept the system running when everything else was shutting down. Okay. And I have seen time and again where sometimes it's the people who are most necessary to the operations of this entire municipality that are considered the most expendable. There's a set of people that we were told go outside and clap at 7 p.m. And then there's a set of people that we would give the money that they actually deserve. And sometimes, those two things are in contradiction. What I think, there's no question that there's money that is being spent in ways that is not effective for this state, right? We have a close to $230 billion budget. We are the 10th largest GDP in the world if we were a country, but generally 10th largest. The places that I take real issue with is the fact that when the MTA built out the 2nd Avenue subway, more money was spent on consultants than construction.
Absolutely. Yes.
And that's absolutely here with contracting is you become addicted to seeing the solution as external, even when it becomes more expensive.
But hold on. Let me touch that if I could for a second. Please. Isn't part of that, I would say a big chunk of that, having to follow government guidelines and regulations? The vast majority of those consultants that were used, not all of them obviously, but the vast majority were used for two things. One, to follow some government regulation, whether it was state, local, federal, often federal for reasons why I don't even know why, but often true, all these different things. And on top of that, or politicians rewarding their buddies, right? So grift. So two parts, following, these guidelines, which may or may not be valuable. I don't know half the time. And the second piece is grift. I think that to me feels like a bigger chunk of the consultants. I want to say it because I've been a consultant before for the city and I know consultants for the city. So I get it. I get that. Right. So the money's going to somebody, might as well go to me. So I mean, there's a lot of that. And there's a lot of glad handing, right? It's, oh, you hooked up this person. Let me get you this. Let me get you that. I feel like I think that's one of our bigger issues.
I think that I wouldn't say it's through following government guidelines, but what I would say is over the last few decades, especially within the Democratic Party, this neoliberal approach of how to govern, there is a desire to show that we are making the state smaller, that we are saving money, a desire to project that even when it is in contradiction, sometimes especially when it is in contradiction to actual results. So Governor Cuomo, our former governor, had a transformation plan for the MTA. And the idea was to cut down the size of the MTA, the quote unquote, the bloat of the MTA.
Right.
And what ended up happening is it was not a systematic redesign of what positions were necessary and how things could be streamlined and whether there was anything that was duplicative between, New York City subways and Metro North and Long Island Railroad and whether some things could be streamlined. What ended up happening is that when people left or retired, their positions simply oftentimes were not replaced. Right. And when you had COVID, when you had the pandemic strike, and you had many people who passed away, many people who then retired, many people who left their jobs, it was a haphazard collection of employees who left across the spectrum, right, that were then together cumulatively hailed as a reduction in expense.
Right.
It doesn't make anything more effective, but it can be portrayed as if, look at me, I'm cutting down on costs, I'm saving things.
So
and I think
let me do a little admin if I could real fast.
Please.
If you're listening or watching this show and you like what you're hearing, do me a favor, click that like button. It does matter. Click the like button. It does matter. Please do so. If you happen to be watching on Twitter, then retweet this right now. I'm always trying to get past Al Gore. Algorithm. I'm trying to get past the algorithm to the best of my ability. I can only get past the algorithm if you guys share, if you guys like, if you guys comment, all the things. If you want to get your chat ahead, which I will talk about in a second, you can always super chat me if you happen to be watching on Larry Sharpe YouTube. And look, this man is here giving us some love. Let's give him some love. Follow him on Twitter if you would. It's at Zohran Mamdani on Twitter. Please follow him there. Show him some love. See what he's doing. Check his website. Check out his Instagram. I'm sure he's got cool pics of him doing duck faces. All good, I'm sure. Do all those cool things. It's great. Please make sure that happens. I would really appreciate it. And I do have a couple of super chats I want to grab real fast if I could. Roger Meadows, he has an idea which he brings up often. He says to restore trust in government, craft a legislative referred constitutional amendment to allow voters to place our own amendments on the ballot to ratify in the New York State Constitution. Roger has been talking about the idea of more ballot initiatives either to create laws or ballot initiatives to create constitutional amendments, that kind of thing. I love the concept. I think it helps to get past gridlock. Sadly, we're having a one-party state across New York State often, where we have one party where one person can control everything. I'm sure you deal with that all the time. Do you have a feeling about, constitutional amendments or, ballot initiatives? Do you have a feeling either way on this?
I think amendments are different than a convention.
Sure.
And so amendments, there is a process. My understanding of the process is you introduce legislation that has to be passed in 2 consecutive legislative sessions, and then it's brought to the voters on a ballot. And yes, I think that there are a number of very interesting questions that have to be raised around what our Constitution is right now and whether it's in keeping with what the spirit of it was versus the actual practice of those words today. I know that one constitutional amendment that I have voted for is around codifying a woman's right to choose. And that being something that should come before voters. But I am generally receptive to the idea that let people vote, with the question put in front of them. Because there is so much that, you and I are of different political persuasions, but I think that there is a commonality across a number of issues, not just between you, not between you and I per se, but between New Yorkers at large, where if you put the question in plain language, it becomes a different matter than how it is debated, 100%. Right? Yes. So I'll give an example of something in plain language. For years, the legalization of marijuana was treated as if something was so radical of a step. It was one that we really had to go through decades of advocacy to get to. I've been in office since 2021, January 1st, and it's in my time in office that we legalized marijuana.
Yes.
And I believe if that
that was a ballot initiative 10 years ago, it's legal.
It's legal.
And so would codifying Roe v. Wade.
Legal. And I think that another example would be, do you want to raise taxes on the highest earning companies to pay for X, Y, and Z public service? I think you would see a different kind of reception, because these companies have a disproportionate influence on our political process. But for the average working person in New York City, they know from their own life that those companies can afford to take a little bit more of a hit on their profits in order to pay for that which is necessary. So that's where I think an idea of ballot initiatives, it is something that when I've seen other states do it, it is very interesting because it manages to take politics out of the ecosystem that it lives in.
Yes.
In a way that it seems to be unique to a ballot initiative.
I think that, and the point I bring up with, I feel like too many people, and I don't want to get you in trouble, so I'm not going to say any names or anything. So I'm saying too many, so you don't get in trouble. Too many people who've been in power too long, they get captured by corporate interests. It just happens constantly. So, and that's not just New York, that's across the country, right? They just get captured by corporate interests. At that point, they're not going to put it on the ballot because the corporate interests say, don't you dare do that because I bought you. So now I own you and you don't get to do that. But I feel if you have more of just, we can do it through, say, petitioning or some other system other than, the leaders have to put it up there, I feel like a whole lot more would be done. And corporate capture would be less valuable. Am I wrong on this?
I would say that if you had more questions on a ballot that voters had to answer in the way that you do with New York City, a lot of times there are questions on the ballot. There are questions of, do you want to create this office? Do you want ranked-choice voting? I've voted for those things over the years, but I do think it's important to recognize that those corporations, as soon as they feel threatened on the ballot initiative, would come in droves, and we've seen that with California and the ballot initiative around Lyft and Uber and the characterization rather of employees. So it wouldn't be that we'd be able to remove them entirely, but I do think it would create the debate a little bit more in a public space. So it's something that I'm receptive to, and I do have, I can't say what now, but I can assure your viewer who brought this question up that I do have a number of thoughts on certain stipulations in our Constitution that I don't think are in keeping with what the intention was at the time, and do deserve to be rectified. And once we publicly launch a campaign, I'll be sure to come back to speak more about it.
There we go. Well, Roger Roger really wants to. I'm gonna give him one more question for you. He says, Larry, a public bank would take care of financing. No need to depend upon Amazon for our infrastructure. Now, Roger and I have actually spoken about public banks in the past. I'm not against the public bank. My issue with the public bank is I want to make sure that it's one of its primary goals is supporting local credit unions to support local businesses. That's like my number one thing. I want to support local without the need for FDIC, with local people being able to support each other, local communities being able to grow better with actual financing, not having to go to, I don't know, Bank of America or Chase to get a loan to open a bowling alley or something, right? That's my number one issue. But he brings up this issue, that it can maybe also do this. I don't know if that's too much or not. Do you have any view on public bank either way?
I'm fully supportive of a public bank. And I think that the issue is, this kind of goes back to our earlier conversation around contracting and diminishing the capacity of the state. If the state doesn't have a bank, then the state is forced to rely on some of the entities that the state is supposed to regulate, these private banks, who then make money off of state deposits.
Sure. Yep.
And that is money that we are basically giving over for free to some of the wealthiest entities in our society. And oftentimes entities that have a very different set of desires and goals of what they want out of financial policy. So I do think that the importance of a public bank is that it opens up financing for that which we know is necessary but may not be profitable. Because so often profit and dignity are at odds. And I think that a public bank gives you an opening there. And, Larry, I think an interesting thing I've noticed in what you've been talking about is, the importance of the local, like the importance of socialism. To me, what is most appealing about socialism and how I understand it as an ideology is the extension of democracy from the ballot box to the rest of your life. So if you have the right to choose someone to represent you, should you not have the right to also influence the conditions of your workplace? Should you not have the right to have a voice, an active voice? Because I think that the problem is that in so much of our lives today, we have rendered working people to be passive actors in their own lives. And people, the more passive a person is, the less faith they have in themselves and in society, because they don't 100%. See what influence they could have. And
so let me give you a little bit of a push, if I could.
Please.
And this is a push for Democrats. There is a large wing in New York for sure, across the country, but heavily in New York, of people on the left who are unhappy with the Democratic Party, to which they're looking at people like me or you and saying, why would you ever join a major party? Like, why would you do that, right? Go do third party something or do independent because Democrats don't really care about us. That's becoming a more and more common. I'm sure you hear that, right? That's becoming a more and more common scream, right? Don't. Democrats aren't doing it. And the thing that why so many people on the far left have talked to me is I brought up public banks. What I will call, I don't want to get you in trouble, what I will call corporate Democrats would never want to see that happen. They are totally against the public bank, would never want to see it happen. but something else. I talk often about the idea of what you talk about, supporting co-ops in New York State. I mean, why can't we have a law in New York State that says when a company's going bankrupt, there's a 30-day window. I'm making that number up. Maybe it's longer, but sake of argument, 30-day window to where now the workers can buy the company. And if we have, right, we don't have that now. Now vultures step right in. We don't have that. Instead, we 30-day window, maybe it's 60. I don't know the mechanics, so I'm saying 30 for the sake of argument. It's just a window. If the workers can't get financing, if the workers can't do it, let the vultures come in, right? But see if we can get them to do it. And if we have a public bank with localized credit unions, that is how they can find the financing. Add on to it one more thing. The government says, if I owe you any money, an example would probably be something like unemployment, right? If you're going to be unemployed when your company goes under, I'll give it to you all up front. If I owe you money for a problem, you sued the state, I owe you money. If I owe you money, I'll give it to you up front. Take the money now, match it with the credit union, buy the business. You now own it. I think this kind of rule, which I talked about constantly last year and the year before that, I think could actually work. It could make, I think you know this too, one of the reasons why co-ops are not supported is the financial industry doesn't like them, doesn't think they work, think they're broken, all those things. And maybe they're right. Maybe co-ops are bad. I don't know. We haven't tested it, so I don't know if that's really true or not, but maybe they're right. But let's do the law, let them do it. And if the banks are right and they all fail and they're all terrible, well, they were right, fine. No one uses the law. But maybe they'll work. And then maybe banks will jump on board and say, let's support these co-ops.
I laugh because I don't know if the banks will get on board at the end. But I think that,
this they want to make money.
This idea is reminiscent to me of a colleague and a comrade of mine, Assemblywoman Marcella Matenis of Sunset Park, who introduced legislation called TOPA, Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, that if a landlord is selling their building, the tenants of that building should have the first option on purchasing that building. And that is, what I fully agree with the idea that if a company is going bankrupt, give the first option to the workers.
Absolutely.
And what's beautiful about being in Astoria and representing Astoria is this is a place where people are pushing the boundaries of what is considered to be acceptable economic thought, or even practice. And you have food pantries that are tied up in the same location as a free library and a people's bodega, which gives out snacks and water at protests, and all of these ways of kind of disrupting the idea of a profit-driven society at all costs. And I've spoken to a number of workers who are interested in having more control in their own life, and they have pursued that through unionization, but they're also pursuing that through this idea of cooperatives.
100%. I prefer co-ops to unions any day of the week, right? I'm not against unions at all. Unions are, in my view, and some libertarians disagree with me, but in my view, unions are the First Amendment. It's freedom of association with freedom of speech. I'm totally fine with unions. My worry is public unions aren't negotiating with their bosses. They're negotiating with their buddies. That's the problem. Now, if you want, in my view, how you fix public sector unions is not breaking them up. Let them people unionize. I don't do it if you want to, make it, no problem. But instead, every one of the budgets, every one of the deals, every change should be voted on by the public. We're the ones paying. It should be referendum every single time. Every time you want a new union deal, no worries. Let the people vote. We're paying for it. And people will get mad and go, wait a minute, Larry, that's not good because we'll screw unions. Half of us know someone working in a public sector union. At least, if not all of us, we all know somebody who's working for the state, working for the city, working for the something. Why would we even screw our buddies over? But no, maybe now, instead of the money now going to politicians, the money would have to go to a public advertising campaign and say, hey, we're doing the work, guys. Vote for our new contract, or don't vote for our new, or whatever the case may be. I feel like that's a better way of fixing the public union issue rather than trying to break them up. As many governors try to break up public unions, public sector unions, I'd rather just have them negotiate with their bosses like every other private sector union. Changes the whole game. I don't know, am I crazy here? Tell me if I am.
I don't agree with that. And I think, if I think I don't agree with it for a number of reasons. One is because I think that I fully, we have had these governors time and again seeking to break up public sector unions, and what I mean by that is really seeking to diminish the power of those unions. And I think that the power of those unions is not actually a hindrance to the objectives of the state. If anything, it is an asset. And I think that you would see, we're talking about the MTA. So I come back to the example of TWU. These are workforces without which we could not have much of the economy in New York City. And my concern, I do think that they have not been treated fairly by governors prior. And I do think that the way these contracts have been negotiated are oftentimes seeking to diminish their power. I think the answer does not lie in then making it a referendum, because if the motivation of making a referendum is to take money that is going to politicians and make it spent on a public campaign, then in effect what you're doing is taking from the political class and giving to the consultant class, which
they're getting it already. It's just a lobbying class. No, I'm going from lobbying class to marketing class. Good. I don't have a problem with that.
I don't think the solution lies in one of those industries versus the other. But I do think that but
hold on. The issue is if in the lobbying class, and this is my biggest issue, right? If I give it to the lobbying class, now I'm having lobbyists almost, and in certain cases actually, purchasing power from my government. If I'm giving it to the marketers, they're just putting a bunch of commercials on CNN or something. So what? That's fine. They're not controlling the people, right? They're not controlling. All they're doing is doing more advertisements, which is fine. People ignore them anyway, whatever. They'll text you on your phone, say yes to unions or something. And most people, the average American supports unions. Some don't, but the average American does. The odds of the unions getting screwed. But here's the difference. Right now in New York City, if I want, or not even New York City, any place across New York State, if I want change within my city, within my system, it's virtually impossible. But imagine if all of a sudden now I have to vote on this. Well, let's say I don't like the fact that, I'm making this up for sake of argument, I don't like the fact that every Wednesday night at 2:00 in the morning, the trash comes by and wakes me up, and my entire neighborhood hates it. What option do I have now? Literally none. That's going to happen. Too bad. That's what's going to happen. But now I got to vote in a referendum. Maybe make some changes all of a sudden. Maybe they don't want to wake me up at 2:00 in the morning anymore because I might vote no. So maybe I get some power. Maybe in that case, I feel like that gives power back to the people and takes it away from the government. That's how I see it.
I see it as, I think what I see doing something like that in the example that you give is you are then hamstringing the operations of that public entity, right? If we're talking about providing a recourse for a 2 a.m. pickup of garbage, and the recourse is whether or not that union's contract should be ratified, then their operations are being used to hang over whether or not they should get a cost of living increase in their salary. So it's a kind of retaliation.
I think you're kind of right. Yeah, I think that's true.
I think
I'm just okay with it because I want them to service the public. So I think you're right, and I'm kind of okay with it, to be forward.
I don't agree with that, and I don't agree with it because I think that the core issue here is not whether or not a public sector union should get a cost of living increase or how the contract should be negotiated, but rather that people in an individual level feel like they have some influence over their lives.
Yes,
agreed. Have some influence over the world around them.
Agreed.
Because more and more we are being made to become kind of atomized, and we are just individuals who feel like we are being controlled by outside influences of the market, of the state, of whatever it may be. And where I disagree with you, in addition to what I've said, is the way in which you can influence something is by joining with others.
Okay.
So, for example, your issue is a 2 a.m. pickup of your sanitation.
Sure.
You get 25 people on your block to come to your local elected official's office and you tell them that I am here for one specific reason, you have now politicized what is otherwise one action in the entirety of your day. And the issue here is that the government, the state, should not make it so difficult for people to feel their influence. And what we need to do is to make it easier for people to feel their power as individuals, as part of this state.
But this goes back to our first piece that we talked about earlier, which is many people feel like it doesn't matter, right? A common thing across New York City, across New York State, is, here's your public forum to come talk about an issue that you care about, right? People show up, get mad. Don't do this, blah, 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 mad. Everyone there is a part of a city or state agency, nods their head, yeah, and does it anyway. That is a common occurrence across the state. And when people do get to 25 people or 30 people, whatever, and they say, don't do it, we don't want it, the state goes, yeah, and does it anyway. And they go, what the hell? What am I going to do? So they start feeling like it doesn't work.
I think oftentimes there are those scenarios. It happens. It happens a lot. And where you have a public forum as public performance. And you have a forum as a means of simply being an outlet of frustration, one that can make people feel as if they've taken action and then let them become a little more amenable to that thing which they protested in the first place because they're tired. The reason why I continue to be in office in terms of even signing up to run is because in the years that I've been in office, there have been a number of achievements that have been successful manifestations of organizing in public with ordinary New Yorkers. And I'll give a couple examples, but one that comes to mind most explicitly is in 2021, I worked with the New York Taxi Workers Alliance. And we worked together to fight for debt relief for working class taxi drivers across this city. And this was something, an idea that I fought for in my campaign. I sent a mailer on this issue saying we would end excessive medallion debt. And then when I went to Albany, I had the privilege of questioning then Mayor de Blasio because I was a member of the city's committee, and I pushed him on his proposal for debt relief, which was a bankrupt proposal, bankrupt in the sense that it was bullshit. And I pushed him on it, and that was in February. And we started to organize with the union. And over many months, we built a plan that involved working with a whole spectrum of drivers, but all the way also up to Majority Leader of the U.S. Senate, Chuck Schumer. And it manifested itself in the fall in 45 days of protests, press conferences, rallies, peaking with myself and 5 other elected officials getting arrested outside of City Hall, and then going on a 15-day hunger strike. And I starved myself, as did many others, to showcase what the city was forcing working class taxi drivers to do to make ends meet. And I say this whole story because in the end, on November 3rd of 2021, we won a landmark agreement from the city of New York to guarantee every single loan that taxi drivers had and to create a debt relief settlement that has to this date paid out more than $300 million.
Okay. I'm with you, but that's a big deal. Like that, two things. One, you're literally hunger striking. Like that's a big deal, right? So to ask everyone to be hunger striking, that's a lot to ask, is what I'm saying. It's a big deal. But it's the second piece. I'm with you. I'm glad you did it. Well done, right? I probably wouldn't have done it. So nothing but props. Well done. All I'm saying is it's a big deal, but it's a second piece here too, though. The medallion concept in general, right? So now I'm fighting a government program in the first place that I feel like I would have rather been setting up something to fix the Uber problem, if that makes any sense, right? Because Uber and Lyft aren't going away. I feel like that would have been a bigger push to. I would rather have the government, if it's going to do something, settle on the future, not on the past. And the government's constantly settling on the past. I want to be settling on the future. But I get what you did. I get it. But so now the taxi drivers are better off. I know. For those of you who are watching, don't know how bad it was. This was a really big deal. Literally, the medallion system had become a system to where it basically just punished immigrant families, is what it became. It became a system to where literally more and more people were committing suicide. It became a terrible, terrible system. So again, props to you for doing something for it. I appreciate that.
And I appreciate it. And I bring it up not to say that every issue needs to be won through a multi-year struggle that is underpinned by a decades-long work by the New York Taxi Workers Alliance, but more to showcase that there are possibilities in winning the system that we deserve. And I have other examples of times when I've been engaged that have taken far less, but what it always requires is organizing beyond yourself. Because
So let me touch an important piece, though, here. You're talking about making things better for individuals, which I agree with. No argument there. I'm with you. My worry is as we keep putting out more cash for the MTA, putting out more cash for the taxi drivers, raising minimum wage so people get a living wage, all the things, right? Giving out more family leave, all the things that we want to give out to make people's lives better. Okay, I get it. Are we then on the other side of that, creating an environment to where the small and medium-sized businesses are able to grow enough to support this? Now, the big businesses like Amazon, they don't care. You're right. They've got the cash. They can push back with lobbyists. They can write big checks, whatever the case may be. But the smaller businesses are being hurt. And I feel like what's happening in New York State, and been happening for years, maybe over a decade now, New York State for a long time was the slowest growing state in the union. We are now not even growing anymore. We're now losing population every single year. And now it's over 300,000 people a year. New York City's under 8 million now for the first time in at least a decade, if not more. It's under 8 million when it was 8.5, 8.6. Now it's under 8 million. And we've lost, give or take, in the last 2 or 3 years, about $40 to $50 billion. This is by the IRS's numbers in income. The revenue into New York State directly because of migration. This is, of course, according to the IRS numbers, not my numbers. IRS says we lost the last 2 years, $20 and $25 billion. So $45 billion in the last 2 years we've lost due to migration. That's because of what the IRS says. What are we doing to keep people and businesses here so they can afford to pay for the other things? I always worry about that.
So I would push back on some of the numbers because part of the idea of increased taxation, part of the classic pushback is this fear of the flight of wealth. In 2020, we had about 70,000 millionaires, right? In 2021, we had more than 80,000. So the number of millionaires is going up in our state. I do not contest that people are leaving this state. I have a different analysis as to why. I think the people who are leaving this state are in fact the working class of this state who are being priced out of living here. And I see a direct responsibility for that pricing out at the feet of the government. And I am part of that government. So I bear responsibility as well.
I'm not going to argue on that point at all.
And the responsibility I see is that the mayor of New York City sets the rent for the more than 1 million rent stabilized units in New York City. Mm-hmm. The governor has to sign off on your Con Ed rates every 3 years, typically, in a Con Ed rate case.
Yep.
These are direct decisions that change whether or not life is affordable here. Yes. Then we have the fact of housing policy at the state level. We have the power to say that your rent is only justifiably increased by a specific amount. We have the power to say that if the landlord wants to raise your rent by 34%, that's too high. But we are not using that power. And instead, what we are saying is let the market determine who lives and leaves New York.
No. We're literally having you just said the mayor and the governor deciding. That's
We're
not the
having
market.
we're having the mayor and the governor decide the first 2
Right.
points, and
Yep.
then with regards to units outside of rent stabilization, we're saying leave it to the market. So we're abdicating our responsibility in the first two. Sorry, we're abdicating our responsibility with regards to the market, and then with the responsibilities that we have, we are not making life more affordable for New Yorkers. We are in fact making it more expensive. We are increasing the cost of the fare. We are increasing the cost of the rent with rent stabilized apartments. We are increasing the cost of your gas bill through Con Ed. And this is where we need to understand who has responsibility and what the decisions should be made. What we should be doing, in fact, is making life more affordable for these very people who are priced out of this. Because every year that we increase the rent stabilized units by 7% or 6%, we know that by and large, the working class tenants who live in those units are not getting comparable salary increases. How can we then do those things? How can the mayor do those things and then still have a conversation about why does migration occur? So to me, it is a failure of our city and our state to its working class residents, both in the direct responsibilities it has, as well as the ways it could regulate the market. That is why we have this issue of migration. And that's where I think we really need to
but there's two issues, though, I want to bring up. The first one is, if we have people leaving the state, and lots of them are, I think we would agree with that. And I think you're right. Some of them are working class people, 100%. Many of them, particularly upstate New York, lots of people who are working class or working poor. There was a thing I mentioned 3 years ago. As soon as the lockdowns happened, I said immediately, I said, this is the worst thing you're going to do. You're going to destroy the state worse than ever. The lockdowns. I said, within a year, and I have the receipts. I did it on live. I said, within a year, you're going to have people in New York State literally just packing up and leaving their homes. Not caring if they have a lease, not caring if they have a mortgage, just leaving. See you in court if you can find me. Goodbye. Not even caring. And literally, as you may know, on the New York State government website, there is now a thing called zombie houses. Their words, not mine, called zombie. People packing up and leaving. So I agree with you completely that the data's in. There are working class people leaving also. But I can't just go pay them more without somehow supporting the businesses so they can pay them more. That, I guess, is my issue. I agree with you. I wish everyone could afford to get, $50 an hour, $100 an hour. It's awesome. But I can't just announce that. I wish everyone's rent could be cheaper. I love the idea. But how do I do that without somehow incentivizing the businesses to be able to pay those salaries and still want to stay in New York when they can go to Florida or Texas or wherever where they're all running to, like there's no tomorrow? The businesses are leaving. If you look at, generally speaking, in New York, I think it's also Illinois and California, almost all of the economic growth is not due to private sector. It's due to the government infusing money. This is not a healthy way of getting people to bring more money into the system. Am I off on this? I'm happy to be wrong here.
No, I think that what makes New York City special is more than just the economic conditions of the city. And I think that so often when we do tax policy comparisons, what it allows for is a race to the bottom. Where if Georgia is providing a astronomical rebate for film studios to put their business there, then we have to catch up to that. And the only people who really benefit in the long term, right, the true victors of a race to the bottom economics are the corporations. And my issue here is there's 2 points. One is, when you increase the minimum wage, you also see a boost coming into the local economy. And that is, I wouldn't pose an increase in minimum wage and the fate of small businesses as two things that are in conflict. In fact, that minimum wage can help to drive more funding because of discretionary spending that it's allowing people to have into that small business. Now, the point that I would make about, for example, the rent.
Sure.
Housing is not a luxury good. It should not be. Let me say it that way. It should not.
I agree.
that you can be priced out of. It should not be a Ferrari.
Mm-hmm.
It should be like water. It should be like Wi-Fi in this day and age. These are things which every person should have. So what is difficult for me is if we talk about rent stabilized units, you have landlords who have, for the vast majority of their ownership of that unit, made an increased profit every single lease. In the Bloomberg era, when inflation was minimal, you were seeing significant increases year after year after year. Reason for that being Mike Bloomberg was the decision maker as to the rent increases.
Sure.
Now, if you froze those rents at this time, landlords would still be making a profit. But the issue at its core would be that they're not making as much of a profit as they could be making when they're operating market rate units. And so that's where we have to differentiate between enough money to continue operating and enough money to satisfy that which they could be making elsewhere. And the problem.
So let me give you two ideas. One would be, what if we were to incentivize current landlords who are struggling to make the numbers that they want to make, whatever those numbers are, right? And or new construction. It incentivize them to do rent to own programs. Incentivize them to give ownership to people who, you and I both know, there are many people in the city who believe they will never own a home in their life. Literally probably millions of people. I don't know the numbers, but it's high. Who believe I'll never own a home in my life. It's never going to happen ever. But what if we were to incentivize people to actually do that? That if they rented the rent to own program, so that equity would occur in the home, say after the first year or something like that, that right at that point, there's some equity in the home. So if that person leaves, you got to write them a check. They're an owner, right? Wealthy people and savvy people, when they move, they get a check because they always have equity in whatever they're purchasing or whatever the case may be. The average New Yorker is paying rent. And when they leave, if they're lucky, they get half their something their 1 month's rent back if they're lucky. Usually they get nothing. Right? If they're lucky, they get half. So I feel like if we did that kind of thing and incentivized ownership, this helps with gentrification issues. This helps with people thinking, oh, do I want to own something or not? Equity issues, all the things that I think many of the wealthy people get. Wouldn't it be better if we, instead of capping rent, something like that, incentivize people to turn the home, right? Because if I have to keep turning the home, I keep building new homes. So I can build more homes. I incentivize more building, more housing. In theory, if we could even go to tiny housing, particularly for the people who are not housed, people who are in trouble, veteran barracks, basically for veterans, those types of things that they feel comfortable doing, which, as you know, New York City fights like there's no tomorrow. The Department of Buildings is not happy about that. What if we did that and incentivized ownership? Would that be an answer you'd be okay with?
I think if it manifested itself in the way that we had discussed earlier with Marcella Matenis's legislation about giving tenants an opportunity to purchase the building that they live in when a landlord is doing it, that's something I fully support. And I think, the key thing here is that we have made housing as a means by which to build wealth in this country. And the difficult issue is that the potential it has for building wealth oftentimes comes in opposition to the stability it could provide from the person who is living within that place.
It's true.
And so that's, one of the key things for me as a socialist is how do we provide every single person stable, safe, and secure housing where, there's pathways for ownership. Yes. Like in the ones that we've discussed, but also thinking about how Austria, Vienna does social housing. It is public housing in Vienna is synonymous, not with a tiny home, not with NYCHA, but in fact with what we would here confuse with luxury housing.
Sure. Yeah. And it's a very high percentage, like 60% or something are in public housing, something crazy like that.
And I think it speaks to political will and political imagination. And those are the two things that I feel are most missing oftentimes in our political system here is is will and imagination. Because
so let me shift to public housing if I could.
but Larry,
I think public.
I must say, after this, I will sadly have to jump.
Oh, I'm sorry. We kept you. We've been yapping so much. I've not been good. Let me do some admin right now before we go any further. Guys, if you like the conversation we're having, please click that like button. It's a good conversation. Please click it. It does matter. We got to get past algorithm. We have to get past algorithms to the best of our ability. Please do that. If you're watching on Twitter, please retweet. And it's great. The next thing I want to do is, look, the assembly member has given us an hour of his time. He's shown us some love. Please show him some love in return. Follow him on Twitter. See what he's doing. All the descriptions in YouTube and on Facebook. Follow him. See what he's doing. If you like what he's saying, support him, right? Help him out. He needs help. He's running again, right? He's running again. He needs help. So help him out if you can, but see what he's doing. Please follow him. It does matter. I appreciate it tremendously. Yes. Look, I guess there were so many things that I wanted to talk about. I think we had a great conversation in general. I want to bring up one last piece. I had a bunch of super chats and a bunch of comments. I have like 1,000 comments I can't get to. So I'll grab a couple of super chats if I could. Rogers asked a question. Again, Roger is loving you. He's asking all kind of questions. He says we should outlaw private equity from owning housing. A lot of people are talking about this idea. The Vanguards of the world, the BlackRocks of the world, spending so much money purchasing housing and raising all of the rents because they're only worried about profit and nothing else. Do you have a view on this at all?
I do. I have a view in that when I was running for office, 1/3 of all homes were being purchased by unnamed investors. And I think that there are two pieces of legislation that come to mind for me of ways that we can combat this. One is a piece of legislation carried by Assemblywoman Emily Gallagher, which is the LLC Transparency Act, which would create a database that makes it publicly accessible who actually owns these LLCs and who is running them. Because for so many tenants, you have a problem, you have to go to some random combination of letters that is registered to a random post box somewhere else. You don't even know any individual associated with actually owning your property that you live in. That is an issue for any kind of accountability. That adds to what we were saying earlier with a sense of helplessness. The other is a piece of legislation called good cause eviction. And this is typically understood as legislation that would create rights for tenants in market rate units. It would say that, if a tenant has fulfilled the rights of their tenancy, they've paid their rent, they haven't violated any, stipulations of noise or nuisance or whatever it may be, then that they must be offered a lease renewal. And in that lease renewal, that there's a certain amount above which would be considered an unjustified rent increase, right? Let's say is it 5%, is it 10%, along those lines. That is typically thought of for tenants, but it has an anti-speculation impact because so many of these BlackRocks and Vanguards, they are buying these homes and these apartment buildings because there is no regulation on how much profit they can extract from that very property. And if you create a limitation on profit, you disrupt their entire business model, which is a model built on the idea of no limits at any time.
There we go. The last super chat I'll bring up is, it looks like Lil J agrees with you. He says, you need to fix the MTA so people can spread out. I agree completely. I think we're totally good. Look, Assembly member, I know you got to run. I want to say this was a very good conversation. I'm very glad we had it. Please stay in touch. If you want to come back on again, happy to have you on. If you want to come back on again, I'm in your district. So I'm happy, yes, to have you back on again. Anytime you like, happy to do it. I'll let you run. I'm going to try to cover with some of these. So I will let you run. Thank you so much. Let's stay in touch.
Thank you so much. Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Larry.
All righty. Bye-bye. So usually I know I just end the show, but I had so many comments. I want to cover a bunch of the comments. I'm so happy you came, by the way. I know a lot of you are like, Larry, why do you always have, people who aren't libertarians on your show? This is the reason why. I think even for those of you who would disagree with some of the things that he said, I think you can see that he honestly cares and he wants to fix the city. And there are a lot of New Yorkers who think exactly how he thinks. A lot of people across the country who do. And if we're going to make change, we're going to have conversations with everybody. to include socialists. Whether you like it or not, we have to have a conversation with everybody. And I hope at least it was valuable for you. Let me grab a bunch of comments. I apologize for not getting to so many of them. There was such a good back and forth, and I'll grab all these if I can. Let's see here. Dave says, I pay for garbage collection about $60 quarterly. This is a valid point. I think there are systems to where you can pay and get good garbage collection. I think it is. Not in New York City, right? We don't do that. New York City takes control of garbage completely. But outside of New York City, in most places outside of New York City, there's some form of a fee. When I used to live on Long Island years ago, you had to pay for your garbage collection, or you could take it to the public dump yourself if you wanted to. Put it in your back of your truck, in your car, whatever, and take it to the dump if you wanted to. Or you paid for the garbage collection. And I think when you're paying for it, as a general rule, you tend to get better service. Why? Because you're the customer. So you tend to get better service, but not always. Sometimes it's a monopoly. So, but thank you for that, Dave. I do think it can work. I think it can. Jericho says, if people don't trust the government with good reason, then why would you propose they have more involvement in people's daily activities? They'll inevitably screw it up, in my opinion, or will get more expensive. I think that's the norm, Jericho. I think you're right. That is the norm. But you have to understand what he's trying to achieve, I think, and this is my view. I'm sure if I'm wrong, someone will tell me, is he wants us to trust government. He wants us to trust institutions. That's a part of him is right. We should trust our institutions. We should, right, do that. We should. But you're right, Jericho, we don't. I think the answer is more transparency, and I think less government control. I think he would say, I think his answer would be better government control would be his answer. I think we clearly disagree on that. So, yes. So, Pete, I wanted to get to this, but I have a list of things I wanted to get to. I could have talked to him for 2 more hours. He was actually open and giving me honest answers. Pete is asking about the New York taxpayers paying $850 million for the new Buffalo Bills stadium. I wish I could have. I just didn't have time, Pete. I would have asked if I could have. Maybe next time he comes, I'll let him know, and he can answer if he wants to talk about that issue. Right? Again, he is an assemblyman for Queens. So that's not his area, but yes, I'm sure he could have had an answer if he wanted to. So yes. Joe says the limited government governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, just signed a bill into law to not allow car companies to sell directly to consumers. Tesla. Okay, well, there we go. Pete, of course, 31 trillion, 954 billion, 447 million. $260,177.67 national debt. Thank you so much for always remembering that. And that was one of my worries, right? If you heard me in the end discuss it, I agree that the idea that what we should be doing in America is giving people more opportunities to make more money, to be more successful. I agree with that concept. My worry is always the same, though. If we don't support businesses to do that, we're just going to rack up debt, right? I mean, we can just give more people money. We can do that. But I feel like we're just going to rack up more debt. I think you're right in the money, Pete. That's always my worry. If you notice, my ideas always are trying to get companies and businesses to do the right thing with a financial incentive so that all the boats are raised. That is my goal. And I always come from that. Thank you for that. Blue Moon Red Wine, so good. Lucy, thank you for watching. I kind of brought up what you said, but I didn't want to say it in your way. She says, why are you in that shitty party? Having considered breaking away and becoming independent. I did bring it up, but clearly it's not where he wants to go. And I get it. He's part of the party. He probably doesn't want to say bad stuff. I understand where he's going. I want him to come back and keep talking. So I did ask him, but not in your words. I was trying to be polite. So I hope that was good. So yes. Christine says the whole system is corrupt. Yes. Yes, totally accurate. No worries whatsoever. Roger, thanks for the $5 again. Thank you for all the super chats, Roger. I tried to get a bunch to you, but I didn't want you to dominate the entire thing. You would have dominated the whole thing. So thank you for what you've done. Zohran, this is you putting your initiatives before us on the ballot. I'm talking about we the voters. I agree. I think he was saying that, but I did feel like he was open to it. Right? I think he was open to the idea, Roger. That's what I felt at the end as he was talking about it. I think he talked himself into saying, we have a system, but, I'm open to this. I think he is open to it. I think when people, to your point, Roger, when we talk about it more, most people are open to the idea. Maybe they're scared about a detail here or there, right? What percentage? Is it 51% or whatever? I think there's some of that worry, and whether it's law or amendment, I think people will fight over those pieces. But I think most people, they agree. Christian says, Larry, you have the best ideas, and I love how you wanted to take your ideas. That's a true sign of a great person. Sharpe 2024. Thank you for the compliment and then the act of punishment for me running again in 2024. I just ran last year. I'm still sore. That's what I'll say. Let's move past it if we could. But thank you so much. Look, one of the reasons why I do this is so that you can see how other people think and be able to communicate with them and talk back and forth, see where their heads are, but something else. I want them to see that we as libertarians are humans and want good things to happen too. I want them to see that we can have a good conversation. As a general rule, if you're not part of the duopoly, the establishment Democrats, the establishment Republicans, if you're not part of that, you're open to working together in some way, shape, or form. And I think we should. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. So yes. Jericho asks, how do you feel about police unions? This is, you know what? I wish I could have asked that question. I wish I'd seen it. I wish I could have asked it. Jericho, it's a great question. For those of you who may not know, if you're listening, police unions right now are very much pro-Republican and anti-Democrat. The other unions are very much pro-Democrat, anti-Republican. So I wonder how you feel about the police unions, because they kind of are anti-Democrat now. Many of them are just hardcore Trump supporters, actually, but they're all vote red, right? They're all win red. The police unions, corrections officer unions right now, they all are. Great question. I wish I was able to ask that one, Jericho. So good. Next time, if he comes on again, next time. Yes. Roger said, credit unions are financial co-ops. Yes. Ace Hardware retail co-op. Oh, I didn't realize Ace Hardware was a co-op. That is a very, you know what? I need to check that out. Thank you for that, Roger. I did not realize Ace Hardware was I knew that. I thought they were franchises. That's what I thought. Until you just told me that now, I thought Ace was franchises. Okay. I will check that out. Yes. Organic Valley, a dairy AG co-op. I've seen it before. Ocean Spray, I knew. I did not know Land O'Lakes. Okay. Look, I'm open to it. Let's do it. I like it. I'm going to check out Ace. That I did not know. That's good new information. I appreciate that. Yes. Paula brings up the biggest piece. Yes. The market cannot throw me in jail. It can destroy you in other ways, but it can't put you in jail. You're right. 100%. Yes. Abiding someone. Why have you not been demonetized? Who says I haven't? Why do you think I want you to click the like? Why do you think I ask you to support me on Patreon? Right? I say all the time, here it is. Patreon.com/Sharpeway. Why do you think I ask you? Who says I haven't? I'm one of the rare people who are out here actually trying to get things done. I'm one of the rare people out here trying to make real change. I'm one of the rare people out here trying to mix and match and talk to real people. Yeah, I'm getting demonetized. So yes, absolutely. So let me grab a couple more of these if I can. Lil J says, how is the working class leaving New York when most of them are on Section 8? They don't have the money to get out of the state. This is a valid point. I think some are leaving. That was my point about the zombie housing thing. Lil J, some people are just packing up and leaving, and they don't care about their debt. They're literally saying, I don't care about my lease. I don't care how far I am back on my mortgage. I don't care. I am packing up, putting my stuff in my car, and driving south. They're just doing it. So you're right. How are they leaving? Just leaving. See you in court. Good luck. Hope you can find me. Just leaving. And that's a real thing. It's called zombie houses. The New York State government website has it on their website talking about the problem with zombie houses. And again, I called this 3 years ago. I said 2020 May, that was going to happen. By the next year, it was on the website. There was no doubt. So yes. Snow Himbo says, quit the Dems, become an independent. Maybe I'll, you're the second person to bring that up. Maybe I'll bring that up with him next time. The problem is I'd rather bring it up with him privately. Maybe I'll have to sit down with him and see if he'll talk to me, because I don't want to put him in a position to where the party begins to try to shut him down and it's my fault. If the party's going to shut him down, let them do it on their own, not because of me. I don't want to be the guy who does that. So I'm happy to have that conversation if he'll have it. Maybe I'll reach out to him and see if I have to sit down and ask. I don't know why. My assumption is, and again, if you're not in New York State, you may not know this. New York State's DSA, Democratic Socialist of America, is actually pretty effective in getting people elected who are members of their party. Now, some people don't like the DSA. That's a personal thing. Some people like DSA, some people don't. But they are actually very effective in getting people elected compared to probably any other caucus within the Democratic Party. So if you want to be elected, DSA is not a bad place to go if you're a Democrat. Now, to your point, maybe he shouldn't be a Democrat. Maybe, but maybe he should deal with that not publicly like this. But whatever. Thank you for the chat. Lil Jason, we need a state bank to create affordable homes. You see, but I do have a worry, right? Roger brought up the idea of the MTA. You're bringing up affordable homes. I'm gonna do a show on this coming up. I've been bugging Roger recently with some people I want to talk to. I want to have a deeper conversation about public banks because my worry is I don't want it to become simply another Fed and just a money printer, right? That is my worry. I'm not saying it will become that, Lil J. I'm not saying it's going to become that, Rod. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that's my worry. I want to make sure that the charter that is created, that make sure that does not happen. I don't want it to fund everything. I feel like we're asking for trouble with that. It's got to have a specific mandate. I would rather have the public bank support local credit unions. I want that separation, right? Because if one credit union makes mistakes and goes under, that's one credit union, right? If they decide we're just going to print all the money, I mean, theoretically they're not, but they're just going to do it and they're going to fail, that's one credit union. I don't want a systemic failure. That is my worry. And again, to be forward, I haven't done all my homework on this yet, so I don't have the answer. I'm just telling you that is my concern. So I get what you're saying. I don't want to go too far. So just for that. Holman says, everything is way overpriced. If the working man isn't making money, the companies are not going to make money because we're not spending. Well, the problem is things aren't localized, Holman. So I can be a company making money in New York State and my customers are outside of the state. I could be a company making money in New York State and I can live outside the state and the money gets shipped to me. So with the way we work globalized, the way we work, remotely and such, I'm not sure that there's a direct correlation or direct causation in New York State itself. I'm not sure that is. So localized doesn't always work in that regard. I want more and more localization, which I didn't get. Again, we could have talked for another 2 hours. I didn't get to that piece either. So yes. Let's see. Jericho says, thanks for having someone outside the usual echo chamber. One reason why your show is so great. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. I do appreciate that. Yes. Roger said, Larry, where in Long Island suburbs did you live? I lived out in Suffolk County. I actually graduated high school from Central Islip High School, which is on the South Shore of Suffolk County. For those of you who don't know, South Shore was southern, not South Shore, but southern part of Suffolk County. About halfway out, maybe, give or take. Suffolk County, maybe about halfway, give or take. Maybe a little closer, about halfway or so. So, yes, there we go. See if I can go here and grab another one. Cinema registered independent. You may not like her, but people can do that post-election. Agreed. It can be done. So I don't want to get him in trouble. We'll see what happens there. Yes. Guys, if you like the show, do me a favor, click the like button. It does matter. If you haven't already, please click it. Share this on Twitter. Share this on Facebook. These kind of, when's the last time you saw an open libertarian have a conversation with an open socialist? No yelling, no screaming, just conversations, just ideas back and forth. This is what politics should be. These conversations back and forth, seeing if I think my idea is the best, I'll hopefully let you decide. If he thinks his is the best, you should decide on that too. I really think this should be the norm, right? This should be the norm. Lil J asks, thank you again for the super chat. I appreciate it. Can you get the North Dakota bank employee on the show? I think I have somebody better, maybe even two people better. So I am working on this. It is not my number one issue, but it is one of my issues. I am working on it and I'm getting it better, right? So I have not forgotten. I will take care of this. Maybe not as fast as you want me to. But again, I still have to go do other things. If you guys want me to not do other things, I can work just on this. Head over to patreon.com/Sharpeway. Send me $10 a month so I can keep this going. Guys, I want to say thank you so much for this evening. I thought it was a great conversation. I hope we'll get a lot of people sharing it and talking about it. And maybe he'll come back on in a month or two. I will see. I'll be back on, I hope, tomorrow night, maybe. If not, definitely, I will have a Juneteenth show, 9 p.m. this Monday, with 3 awesome, cool people talking about Juneteenth and what that means to you, me, them, and everybody else. Please join me then. I will see you all